Good evening. I welcome you to this session on genetics and evolution. Let's just take a few seconds so that we can wait for the rest of the members to join us. So I'm assuming you're with me in this session today because you're a NEET aspirant. You may be in your 11th grade or your 12th grade, doesn't matter. Anyway, you're perhaps wondering why I chose this particular unit, genetics and evolution. So it's for two simple reasons. Firstly, it's been a unit that has been a constant exam favorite, especially when it comes to AIPMT and NEET. This is a unit that's had really high weightage, and mastering the concepts in these 3 chapters in this particular unit can greatly boost your confidence. And the second reason, it's very simple, it's just my favorite set of chapters in 11th and 12th. Okay, so let's just go ahead and look at a few tips and tricks to master the concepts in this particular unit. As you perhaps know already, genetics and evolution is one of the 10 units that you have across your 11th and 12th grade. Genetics and evolution comes as part of the 12th, which you will be learning in your second year. Okay, so as you know, this unit includes 3 chapters, which are principles of inheritance and variation, molecular basis of inheritance, and evolution. So as I told you, your levels of interest may vary in the 3 chapters, but having absolute conceptual clarity is perhaps the first and foremost things that you'd need to keep in mind before you're trying to master any topic, be it for any competitive exam. Okay, so another thing that I'd like to add here, don't judge your liking for a particular chapter without having proper conceptual clarity, because I'm talking from personal experience. I remember when I was doing my second PU, when I was in 12th, I somehow had this misconception that evolution is a very boring chapter, and somehow I just refused to study it. But later on, when I actually sat down to read the chapter, I realized it's definitely very interesting. So again, don't judge your liking for a particular chapter. Keep this in mind. It's a very important thing to know. Okay, going ahead, let's look at the 3 chapters. We'll start off with principles of inheritance and variation. Just remember, we are not discussing actual concepts in this particular session. We'll just be discussing the most important topics and perhaps a few tips to answer a question for your exams. Okay, now principles of inheritance and variation is a chapter that has really good scope for application-based questions. So I guess, in my personal opinion, that's a much simpler thing to do than having to memorize a lot of concepts, because you just need to get the logic right. You need proper practice with a lot of questions so that you're really fast enough to catch up with the speed during your exams, and then you're done. So you don't even need to memorize. You'll need minimal memorization and revision for this particular chapter. So coming to the concept aspect of it, the first and foremost concepts that we are taught in this particular chapter are Mendels Experiments. Okay, so this would form, I'd say, the core of the entire science of genetics. So you definitely need to remember the fact that Mendel is the father of genetics, and secondly, why he chose the garden pea plant for his experiments, and other things like the characters he chose in the pea plant, the monohybrid and the dihybrid crosses, and all the different terminology associated with it, then the Punnett square, and most importantly, the Mendelian laws. Okay, so sounds like quite a lot, but these are just different terms that we discuss in this particular topic. So I'd say once you've got a very good grip of these things that I've just mentioned, the rest of the chapter actually flows. You find it a lot easier when you try to tackle questions from the rest of the concepts. Okay. Now, the next thing once you have figured out the logic behind calculating the monohybrid and dihybrid ratios, I'd say you're still good to go and you're ready to face the next topic, which would be the non-Mendelian inheritance patterns, wherein you need to know the different versions of it, like codominance, incomplete dominance, multiple allelism, pleiotropy, and all of those. So maybe just keep in mind the literal meaning of these. For instance, you might be confused between codominance and incomplete dominance, but if you just think of the literal meaning of co and incomplete, you'd know that co actually means together or side by side, and incomplete would rather mean a blending or a mixing of two different things, right? So just keep such simple things in mind, but the problem-based questions, like I told you, would definitely be a lot easier for you if you have got a proper grip of the Mendelian experiments. Okay. Another thing, the questions based on blood group inheritance can actually be a lot fun to do, but then they can also be very, very time consuming when it comes to your exams, right? Because, come on, you're answering 180 questions in 180 minutes, which means technically you're just getting 1 minute per question, and answering a problem-based question may not be that simple. So I would suggest you need regular practice for this, develop the speed, and actually as you develop the speed, you will also figure out many tips and tricks for yourself, which work for yourself, which will actually help you save time. For instance, what I have noticed is that, it's a very specific example. Say for instance, you're given the blood type of two parents, okay? And you're not given the genotypes, you're just told two parents belong to two different blood groups, and you're asked to predict the possible genotypes or the possible blood types of the progeny. So how would you start off? There are various different combinations which can be possible. So to sit and work out each of these in the exam hall may not be practically possible. So what I have figured out is that if you just consider the heterozygous combinations in both the cases, and if you just work out the crosses for them, you will actually find that the progeny, the genotypes of the progeny that you get from that would actually be a superset of all the possible combinations that are likely to be the result of those two parents. So those of you who actually don't know this concept yet might find what I just told you a bit confusing, but the rest of you, I'm sure you would have understood what I told you. But then the rest of you can still keep this in mind. When you start learning this concept, try it out. It definitely works wonders. And in a multiple choice exam, it's not actually necessary that you complete or you work out a problem till the very last step. Nobody cares about that, because sometimes it may happen that the answer is revealed to you right when you're in the middle of solving it. So then stop it right there and go ahead and answer it. You don't have to waste those extra few seconds to go till the last step. Nobody cares about that. Okay. Okay. Coming to the concepts again. The next important concept in principles of inheritance is sex-linked inheritance, which is, I would say, perhaps the most important topic in the last few years. I think over the last 7-8 years, except the 2017 exam, there's been at least one question from this particular topic. So we talk about hemophilia and color blindness here, both of which are examples of X-linked recessive inheritance patterns. So again, if you have got a grip of Mendels experiments and the actual logic of working out the genetics problems, you're good to go again in this. The only thing that you might have to know as an additional thing here would be the meaning of the terms normal, carrier, and affected, because that makes most of the difference. Okay, just keep that in mind. And then understanding this would also help you answer questions related to the next important topic here, which is pedigree analysis. Now that is again a really fun to work with topic. Perhaps the only thing that you will have to memorize would be the symbols used in a pedigree chart. What symbol stands for whatever. Okay, and you need to know the different inheritance patterns such as X-linked dominance, X-linked recessive, and autosomal dominant and recessive respectively. Okay, and the examples for each of these. But then analysis of a pedigree chart will be definitely a lot simple if you have mastered the basics like this. Okay, and the final topic in this chapter is about the genetic disorders. So according to your NEET syllabus, there are just 3 main chromosomal disorders that you would need to focus on, which include Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, and Klinefelter syndrome. Okay, so you definitely need to know what each of these exactly are. My personal suggestion would be to make notes in the form of a table. So if you don't like it, you can have your own methods, but then this definitely works. So in your table, you can have the name of the disorder, and right next to it, you can just make a note of the condition. Say for instance, if I'm talking about Turner syndrome, I would have that in the disorders column, and next to it, I would make a note of the condition as 44AA plus XO. So that in my final rounds of revision, just one glance at that particular table would help me recollect everything related to it. Okay, so I guess that would be the easiest method to study this. Okay, so that's all from the first chapter. The only things you need to keep in mind would be to get the logic right and practice a lot of problem-based questions. I'm sure those of you using the app already would have figured it out. You would have watched the videos, you're familiar with it, and you would also have taken the tests. The rest of you can still go and try it out, and also the multiple sources available out there. So that's about it. Practice is what you need most. Coming to the next chapter in this unit, which is molecular basis of inheritance. The basic things you need to know in this chapter are the structure of DNA and the Chargaff's rules. Without knowing these two, it's just impossible to progress with this particular chapter, because as you go, this chapter only gets heavier with regard to concepts. So make sure you have a very, very clear picture of the structure of DNA and the Chargaff's rules. And there may also be certain memory-based aspects, such as the scientists who contributed to the history of DNA. So maybe that's the only, maybe among the few things that you would have to know as a memory-based thing in this particular chapter. And then moving ahead, which is probably the biggest chunk of the chapter, the heavy concepts such as DNA replication, transcription, and translation. Yeah, definitely your NCERT books do explain them in a very concise manner. But in my personal opinion, these are processes that take place at a molecular level. So an animation or a visualization of these would definitely be the best way to remember it for the rest of your life. Because just to imagine something, to use your own creativity and imagine it like how it might not actually be, can be risky. So it's not like you don't have access to any sources. You have multiple choices out there. You have a lot of good YouTube videos. We also have presented this in a very, very interesting manner in our chapters videos. Go ahead, take a look. You'll know what I mean, because it makes a very, very huge difference. I would say watching a video for these topics such as replication, transcription, and translation can actually imprint the concepts in your mind. And that makes it a lot simpler. Okay, you'll know what I mean when you look at the questions. Okay. Apart from this, we also talk about the genetic code and lac operon, which are also important concepts in this chapter. So keep a focus on those as well. So yeah, as a final summary of this particular chapter, I would suggest you to have a visual clarity of things, watch very good animated videos, keep revising your notes or your whatever your source of study material is. Constant revision and watching of good videos are absolutely essential to master all the concepts in this particular chapter. Okay, now moving ahead to the third and the final chapter of this particular unit, evolution. Okay, maybe you could look at it like a story that explains how we and other living organisms have come into existence on this planet Earth that originated billions of years ago. So most importantly, this chapter talks about the various theories of the origin of life and the theories of evolution. So you need to have a very good understanding of these. Maybe the best way to learn it would be to understand the literal meaning of the terms again. For instance, if I ask you what does the theory of special creation explain, the word special creation should give you the hint. You should be able to associate with what is in the theory. It's something to do with God's creation. Another example would be Lamarckism, which is the theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics. So if you actually keep that in mind, inheritance of acquired characteristics itself gives you a gist of the entire thing explained in that particular theory. Okay, so just remember that you have understood the meaning, the literal meaning of the words in the names of the theories themselves. Okay, and then perhaps the trickiest things to recall in this particular chapter would be the convergent and divergent evolution, adaptive radiation, and homologous and analogous organs. Well, even if you have studied it, you know it, when it comes to an exam and you're looking at a question from this, it's very natural to get confused. So in such situations, I would suggest mnemonics can work wonders. Okay, you can create them in your own ways. Whatever works easy for you to recall, create your own mnemonics according to your comfort. Definitely that will come in as a very handy tool when it comes to recalling them during your exam. Okay, coming to the Hardy-Weinberg principle now. It's very important to know what exactly the principle is about, and it's also a good idea to get a grip of the problem-based questions in this particular principle. But then what we have seen from an analysis of the past 5 years papers maybe is that the problem-based questions from this particular concept are not so commonly asked, but then it's mostly based on the principle itself, different aspects of the principle itself. But then since it's part of your syllabus, it's always a good idea to know how to solve a problem-based question. So again, practice is the key here. Now, the next thing, geological timescale and evolution and human evolution are perhaps topics that need a lot of memorization. But again, I guess studying it in the form of a table for your own reference would be the best way, so that you can just constantly revise it. Just make sure you have a few minutes for looking at it every single day. And that will definitely have a very good impact in imprinting the concepts in your mind. Okay, so that would be the best option. So in short, remember for this chapter, evolution, knowing the meaning of the various theory names, then creating mnemonics for certain topics, practicing the problem-based questions, learning in a table format. These are the highlights that you should keep in mind to prepare for the chapter evolution. And just one more very quick general point that I'd like to make here. If by any chance you find any of these chapters boring, I'd suggest it's very important to develop an interest in that right now, because 11th and 12th are the years when you're actually forming your base, especially if you're planning to proceed with a career in science. So don't hesitate to ask questions, even if they are very basic things. So watch really good videos, get your concepts right, okay, and then go ahead with practicing it. Because once you have a clarity of concepts, everything becomes a lot simpler, okay? So that's about it. Let's see if we can discuss a few of the questions. I guess some of you have comments coming up. Okay, so there's a question from Swapnil Sharma, and the question is, please tell us about the difference between incomplete dominance and codominance. So I guess I've partly answered this already during the discussion. The literal meaning tells you what it is. Incomplete dominance would mean, so you have two different parents, two different phenotypes. For instance, say, maybe the best way to explain it with the help of an analogy. Imagine you have red paint and you have white paint, okay? So you're mixing it. And if both the paints mix and give you a blend of it, as in if you get pink paint as the result of it, that is what we call incomplete dominance, because it's a new phenotype and it's a blending of the phenotypes of both the parental characters. But then codominance, like the name tells you, co means side by side, okay, or together. So codominance, in the case of codominance in this example, if you were to mix the red and white paint, you would just have patches of white paint and red paint interspersed among the others. So both of them are individually expressing themselves, not really blending like incomplete dominance. So if you really want better clarity of concepts, we can still have another session on this completely. So I hope you've got a gist of what we mean by this. Okay, the next question is from Tanmay. Is polygenic inheritance important for NEET? Polygenic inheritance is a topic that we have discussed in this particular chapter. It is part of your NCERT syllabus. But then, considering the previous year's question papers, it hasn't been a very frequently asked question. But like we always say, the past cannot really be a complete indication of the future. So it's definitely good to know what the concept is about and always remember it with an example. It's not really that hard a concept. Okay, and then how deep should we go into the chapter with regard to aims? Okay, so here, as you perhaps know already, NEET is actually a common entrance exam that's conducted nationwide, and the only exceptions are AIMS and JIPMER, which conduct their own individual exams. So in the case of AIMS, the basic syllabus remains the same. The topics are just like what you have for NEET, but then the level of questions might be a little different. So my suggestion would be to download a lot of previous year AIMS papers, because one unique thing about the AIMS exam is the assertion reason type questions. So without very good practice of those, you may know all the concepts because you're really mastering the NCERT syllabus, but then when you look at an assertion reason question, you might still naturally get confused. So my only suggestion would be to download the previous year's AIMS paper and get good practice of the questions, and you will know to what depth you will have to go into. It won't be really a lot deviating from NEET. Perhaps maybe the physiology chapters might be a little more in depth in AIMS with regard to the other chapters. That would probably be the most important difference. Okay. Okay, so I guess we'll end this session for now. I'm glad you stayed with me for this session. If you still have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to post them here. We will be answering them. And most importantly, please don't forget to like or share this and subscribe to the YouTube page, because the YouTube channel, because you really have very good access to a lot of interesting videos out there. Like I told you, conceptual clarity is very, very important. So I hope to see you again soon. Good luck.